if someone's selling to you, whether it's face-to-face or a brand on TV, the recipient always has a bit of skepticism. Why would I believe Avis when they say they're amazing? But the great thing is, if you admit a flaw, then you've proved your honesty, and everything else you say is that bit more believable. If you pick the right flaw, on many occasions, flaws have mirror strengths. So Guinness, for example, they go out and say, good things come to those who wait. They emphasize their slowness. But what they're realizing is people assume if something takes ages to make, it's probably going to be higher quality. We prefer people or products who exhibit a flaw. Perfection is just not believable.
Help our audience connect with your path and your career. I think it's always good just to have a quick pathway of how you discovered such an influence in the behavioral space and the psychology of advertising and marketing, because I know it's a progression. You've been through that progression. Take us on the journey.
Yeah, so I think often in life, when you develop a passion, develop an interest, you gradually drift towards it. But my interest in psychology and marketing really had a very specific moment when I became interested. So I was working at an agency, and the client was the British Department of Health, and they were trying to encourage people in Britain to donate blood. And I happened to be reading, do you remember The Tipping Point?
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell book? Yeah. So I was reading
Great
that
book.
at the time I got the brief. And right at the end of that book, it's only a page or two, but he talks about a series of studies by two American psychologists called Latané and Darley. And they came up with this idea called the Bystander Effect. And essentially, it's the idea, and they proved it experimentally, that if you ask loads of people to help, there is a diffusion of responsibility, and everyone leaves it up to someone else to do the good thing.
The "it's not my job" mentality.
Yeah,
it's somebody else's.
Yeah. In the case of giving blood, well, why should I go through the pain of the needle, the hassle of getting down to the donation center when I know you, the Department of Health, have asked loads of other people to do it? Why don't they go through the problem? And I happened to be reading this just before I had to respond on a brief. And I remember thinking, well, wait a minute, this problem that these two psychologists are identifying is exactly the problem we're facing. Now, as a advertising message, we're going out and saying, blood stocks are low in England, please donate. But just as Latané and Darley suggest, most people ignore that message. So all I did is I went and spoke to the creative agency and said, look, why don't we apply this principle, stop asking the entire country to donate blood, and let's start being really focused in individual cities and towns. So blood stocks are low in Barnsley or Brentwood or Basildon, small little towns. Please donate. And even though that is a very crude application of an experiment, it's not much creativity there on my part at all. It's a very crude application, but it within a week or two had a 10 or 15% improvement on the response rates, on the conversion rates. So that moment really got me hooked, that the idea that there were these academics out there who had done lots of the hard work, they had unearthed these insights into human nature. And I felt at the time, this was back in 2004, that this great treasure trove of knowledge was being ignored in marketing and ad agencies. So over the last 20 years or so, I've spent my time trying to either match existing studies to brand problems or go out and run my own experiments if there isn't the evidence out there already.
I love it. Yeah, I think, it's interesting because The Tipping Point is such a great book, by the way. And it is one of those books that the more you read it, the more little things pop out. And what you found was such a small little avenue. But by making it something so important for a smaller number of people, it really did impact a greater number for the entire initiative. I run a wine festival, 8,000 people. We've donated a couple $1 million to local charities. And there is two things that I think have been really valuable. Number one is, instead of just selling multiple tickets, we catered the event to businesses and we created private chalets. And each business that buys a private chalet, they each sometimes bring in as many as 150 tickets in one private chalet. And so we pre-sold, of an 8,000 person event, 5,000 or more tickets before the event even occurred. And it was something of similar mindset. It was that individualized personality where we're going to really connect with that business. It also did something else that was really interesting, is that it made people were tied to the business. So less people were drunken messes, less people, there was accountability. Yeah. There was a level of accountability at the event. The second thing came from volunteers. We had 400 volunteers, and people stopped showing up for shifts. Like, the second shift, nobody comes. Everybody comes, they get their free ticket, and they're supposed to come to the second shift, and then they just didn't show up. So we appointed one group. So if it was dance moms from a dance studio, or it was the Humane Society, or it was, the Chesapeake Health Investment Program, one captain was the lead of that organization. And we made a donation to that organization, but that one captain brought their troops. Yeah. And I feel like it's a similar logic. It's you're slimming it down in some capacity for responsibility to feel internal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing I really like about that, and I don't know if I'm interpreting this wrong, but it sounds like that benefit of reduced drunkenness and silliness, and therefore cleanup costs for you, wasn't something you were expecting by selling to businesses, but happened to be a positive repercussion. And that idea that I think in business, you cannot always predict what's going to happen. So therefore try lots of things and have your eyes and ears open to see where these positive repercussions are, and then experiment, do more things, work out what's successful and not, and then cull later on. But I love that idea of unforeseen positives.
Yeah, and it really was. I mean, I think what we saw is there's other wine events and wine festivals in our area, but there's a difference, and the difference came from that business influence, and that business influence then had a personal responsibility for each of those businesses to support the event. And so every time I have a transfer of sponsorship or something changes, these individuals kind of align, and almost to a T, the best contributors up their sponsorship to take more responsibility for the event. And so there are so many different things that we didn't expect, and the experiments happen. Talk to me about imperfection, because I've listened to some of your stuff. I've listened to some of your interviews, your TED Talk. People often take for granted the value of imperfection. Talk to us a little bit about your logic there, and what you've studied and what you found.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite experiments I've ever read about is around imperfection. And the most famous study is probably by a Harvard psychologist called Elliot Aronson. So he ran this back in 1966. And for his experiment, he recruits a colleague, gets that colleague to take part in a quiz. He has given all the answers to the contestant. So the guy does amazingly well, gets 90% of the questions right, wins the quiz by miles, looks like an utter genius. But then as the quiz is finishing, he makes a small blunder, what I think in 1960s Americana people would have called a pratfall. So he spills a cup of coffee down himself. Aronson has recorded this quiz performance and the spillage, and he takes the recording and he plays it to listeners. But the twist in the experiment is sometimes he plays the entire footage, other times he edits out the spillage, so people only hear the amazing quiz performance. Everyone is then asked how appealing the contestant is, and Aronson's key finding is that the contestant is seen about 45-55% more appealing amongst the group who heard the mistake as well as the great performance versus the edited version. So Aronson's argument is we prefer people or products who exhibit a flaw. And he called this the pratfall effect. Now, I'm fascinated by this because if you look at the best ever advertising, especially probably in America, if you look at the best ever advertising, it is remarkable how often this idea appears. You've got VW, ugly is only skin deep, that 1959 campaign. Avis, we're number 2, so we try harder. Listerine, the taste you hate twice a day. Guinness, good things come to those who wait. Again and again, the best brands ever, I think, have recognized this power of admitting a flaw. Because not only do you get the benefit Aronson found, you become a bit more appealing, you become a bit more human. Also, you stand out, which is crucial for any advertiser, because most ads will brag. If you admit a flaw, you're going to be very, very distinctive. And that leads to memorability. And then the other thing it does is any commercial situation, if someone's selling to you, whether it's face-to-face or a brand on TV, the recipient always has a bit of skepticism. Why would I believe Avis when they say they're amazing? They have a vested interest to say they're brilliant. But the great thing is, if you admit a flaw, then you've proved your honesty, and everything else you say is that bit more believable. So it's a really powerful way of closing what I'd call the trust gap. So I think it's one of the most interesting experiments.
I've found this to be so impactful in everything that I've ever done in business, and the things that I've seen successful. Even if you think about people who they follow as influencers, who they follow on social media, people follow the biggest following comes from people that show you all parts of their life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the vulnerability makes them truly authentic. When you're only editing things, and we do a podcast, and we have edited a couple of podcasts because somebody said a name they didn't want to say, or something very, very small. But just last week, I asked a question twice in one that we released, and my team said, "Hey, we noticed that you asked this question twice." And I said, "Well, what was the question?" And they said, "Well, you asked the kids' names. And then she said the ages, and then you said, how old are the kids?" And I said, well, I didn't remember. And so it was true. And I said, we're leaving it in. We don't edit any of these things. These are the imperfections. Show people that this is a conversation. In a conversation, in a podcast, if I edit all these things, it's not real anymore. It's fake. And that's only skin deep. To go back to the 1959, ugly is only skin deep. It's only skin deep.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's an awful lot about this in one-to-one relationships and personal media like podcasts. I think the other bit that's really interesting, if people are thinking about the advertising and marketing angle, is that the final benefit of the pratfall effect is, if you are very clever about this, if you pick the right flaw, on many occasions, flaws have mirror strengths. So Guinness, for example, they go out and say, good things come to those who wait. They emphasize their slowness. But what they're realizing is people assume if something takes ages to make, it's probably going to be higher quality. So really, for a brand, you want to think about what's your core strength, and then is there a weakness that you could admit that might emphasize that core strength? So for many entrepreneurs, many consultants, they might be thinking about price. If they are high price, I would sometimes, compared to their competitors, I would say sometimes don't try and hide that away. Emphasizing you're a bit more expensive, firstly, shows immense honesty, and therefore people believe everything else you say. But secondly, people will assume if you're high price, you're probably high quality. So if you want to push your high quality, emphasizing the priciness is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. I have been in the financial industry for a long time. And, I was 23 years old when I started, and I used this skill and this logic to help me, because guess what? Nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to give a 23-year-old kid their money to manage for the rest of their life. So I would say, listen, I understand I'm young, but I guarantee the person that's currently serving you in this capacity is very old, and they aren't going to be there for your life's transitions. I'm going to be here through your entire life. And this is a way for me to help you in ways that change as you change. And it was as soon as you identified the problem, I understand I'm young. And then I brought them in on my family, and I did my family announcements, and I celebrated the youth that I had. And it seemed to really benefit.
Yeah, I really like that as an example, because what many people might think at 23 is, I'm just going to ignore that and focus on all my strengths. The problem is, age is something that anyone, whenever they meet you, they're going to know you're 23 straight. You're not going to be mistaken for a 50-year-old. So the brilliant thing is, you've admitted a flaw that they knew anyway. So you're getting, now in the way that you position it, you're getting all these benefits, and actually there's no real downside, because they would have realized you were young anyway. There's an amazing study. It's a little bit more abstract than Aronson's, but by a University of Toledo psychologist called Kipling Williams. And he did a study around these kind of fake jury games. And essentially, he had people deciding whether a defendant was guilty or innocent. And on some occasions, some people heard a flawed defense case and then the prosecution case, where the prosecution attacked the flaw. Other occasions, other people heard the flawed defense case and then a single line or two where the attorney admitted there was a problem in their defense case. They didn't try and brush it up, or they didn't even try and mention an excuse for it. And it then went to the exact same prosecution. And what Kipling Williams found was people were more likely to think the defendant was innocent if the attorney had drawn attention to the weakness in their case. Now, I think this is a really interesting example because they never even tried to persuade people why that weakness was an irrelevance. But the very fact of admitting a problem made all their other claims a little bit more potent, a little bit more believable. So yeah, I think that's a lovely example of you back at 23.
That's so interesting that just admitting the vulnerability and the flaw can be something so powerful.
Yes.
And why do you think we do this? Why do you think as humans we're attracted to that? Is it based mostly on the fact that we know our own internal flaws so well, and we think that everything around us might be perfect, but we know it's not inside?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if some of it is certainly in the world of sales and marketing. So much comes back to this skepticism that people know that a bad actor and a good actor can say they're an amazing restaurateur or an amazing financial advisor. So people are skeptical about empty claims. The great thing about admitting a flaw is it's not just a claim, it is a tangible demonstration of honesty. And I think it's sometimes that, show it, don't say it. You've shown your honesty rather than just claimed it. And people will put greater weight on that more concrete demonstration.
Now, as a testament to this, you leveraged some and have theories around bad reviews and negative feedback and how to flip this. And this is, I've heard this strategy implemented before to great success. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, because I feel like sometimes people get so worried about what other people see and what might be out there to the world, and they're missing their ability to the same point we're talking about. And this doesn't just apply to sales and marketing. This applies to everything in life. If you're in a neighborhood and your friends find out that your kid is not perfect or they made a mistake, they're drawn more to you by the very things that we're talking about because it's an admitted flaw. But tell our listeners how you really utilize this theory to help you and to sell more books and to do things that really change the game for you.
So I think the study in question is I think it might be a Northwestern University one. It's a lovely study because it's not 10 students in the 1960s. It's real world data. And they look at 100,000 plus online reviews. And the only reviews they look at are where there is a numerical score, 1 to 5. And then they look at what's the score of the review, and then did someone go on to purchase that item? And what they see at first is completely as logic would suggest. As the review score goes up, people become more likely to purchase. So far, so obvious. But then for every one of the roughly 28 categories they looked at, for every one of those categories, the highest rate of purchase was not 5 out of 5. It was a bit earlier. It was somewhere between, say, 4.1 and 4.5. Now, likely to purchase peaks and then it drops after that. And their argument was perfection is just not believable. If someone goes and sees loads of 5-star reviews, 100% of 5-star reviews for a product, what is more likely, that this product is actually perfect, unlike anything we've ever experienced before, or that company is doing something to filter out the negative reviews and hide them? So people don't react to 100% positive score in a manner that you might expect, but rather it sets off alarm bells, and it creates the sense that this might be a risky purchase. So the point here would be that if you have negative reviews, as you say, don't panic, don't try and airbrush them, don't hide them. They just give an extra degree of veracity to the other points that you might claim.
Now, I implemented this in Italy. So we went to Europe for a couple of weeks, and we often use TripAdvisor. And so we find ourselves in a new area. I like to go to TripAdvisor and I like to look at the reviews. I always look at the negative reviews. Most of the negative reviews come down to a couple of small items. Number one is a lack of patience, a lack of understanding of the culture, a lack of, maybe the way that it's written is angry, so that it might be something that's negative. I immediately go, these are thrown out. This is ridiculous. It helps to qualify the 5 stars for me, or the 4 stars. So if something's 4.9, why is it rated the top 10 carbonara in all of Rome? Why? And then you have somebody that's like, it wasn't that good. And you're like, okay, well, why wasn't it that good? There's no description. There's nothing. It took too long. Oh, so that doesn't matter to me. So I qualify based on that.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting what you're saying around, it's looking at what fact matters to you. So you could imagine someone does a review of a restaurant and says, oh, it's too noisy, there's loads of kids. Now, maybe if you're a couple going on a date, that's a powerful reason to avoid the restaurant. But if you're going with your toddlers, that negative review for one person is brilliant for you. There's often a lot to be said for emphasizing what your product isn't. So there's a comedian who's quite successful in the UK. I don't know if he's made it to America yet, but he's a guy called Stuart Lee, and he's a very political comedian. So he would be, he's left-leaning, very left-leaning. So what he does on his posters is he always runs amazing reviews from the left-wing newspapers like The Guardian. Stuart Lee is a genius. But then he runs next to it really damning reviews from the very right-wing press. So I think one of them was a Daily Mail columnist who said he's a slime pit of bitterness. And he puts this on his posters. Now, I think what he realizes is no one's going to go to his gigs anyway if it's all about politics. So he's not really alienating an audience. They were never going to come. But by putting those negative comments, what it really affirms to his tribe is that he's one of them. So I think there is something, especially for maybe comedian or brands that don't need to sell to everyone, there is something about playing to who you're not for.
And there's really something to be said for not selling to everyone anyway. I mean, it's very difficult to please everyone. And if you've ever talked to anyone that doesn't have an iPhone, they are adamant that iPhones are the worst. But for those of us that have an iPhone, and I don't know that you do or you don't, but I have mine right here. And I'm going to be honest with you. Nothing drives me crazier than that green bubble that I get when I send someone a text because they have a Google phone or a Samsung phone. I'm like, what is wrong with this situation here? And, but we get so adamant on it that those people don't buy Apple phones. They're just not going to buy Apple phones. And there's a reason they didn't jump on earlier. They hate the cult-like atmosphere. They feel like it's a scam. It's overpriced. Maybe they're techie. I noticed that a lot of tech-driven individuals that figure it out easily. What I always loved about Apple is it was easy for me. If I thought it this way, it worked that way. So it's the same kind of concept.
There's a medical concept, like an old, I think, kind of Napoleonic idea. Well, this is when it started. I think it's obviously still around today, called triage, where on a battlefield, you haven't got a chance to help everyone straight away. So you split them people into 3 groups. They're almost dying. There's nothing you can do. Ignore. They're in pain, but they're going to survive. Leave again. Ignore, and focus your efforts on that middle group who are in pain. They're injured, but not so severely that they're going to probably die, and not so minorly that you can just ignore it. And I really like that idea of taking it from a medical situation and think about it in your marketing. If someone really hates your brand, you could spend an inordinate amount of trying to win them over. And it's a very, very hard thing to do. And similarly for your existing customers, actually, that most of their belief is going to come from the product experience rather than the advertising. So I think focusing on that middle group of people who are persuadable is something more brands could probably think about.
Sort of like the independent voters. You know, if you think
Yes,
about the
yes.
independent voters, most people that are independent like ideas on both sides of the coin. And there's only two sides that we ever get offered in most countries. So the reality is very seldom every campaign is taught to go far out to the far reaching levels and then work their way into the middle as the campaign expands.
Yeah, because I think there's the, my knowledge of American politics is worse than knowledge of UK politics, but I think both suffer from a similar problem. Like in Britain, you have the party members who are a very small percentage of the population, who will have a big role in picking the leader of the political party, Labour or Conservatives. The problem is that group is not representative at all. They are at the extremes of the political spectrum. So to become the leader of the party, you need to swing left wing if you're Labour, right wing if you're Conservative. But then absolutely, as you say, when it comes to the actual election, those people are going to vote for you anyway. You have to swing back into the centre to try and pick up the floating voters. So no wonder politicians are often derided as being hypocritical, because they have two very different constituencies to appeal to.
But from this conversation, what would be interesting is it's probably better for the politicians, instead of saying that, they didn't say, politicians often are the epitome of liars, right? They believed something before, and then today they don't believe that. And instead of admitting that maybe they changed their mind on it, or maybe that it's not something that the more information they got, the closer to the issue they got, the older they got, their grandkids changed their mind. Instead of those things, they often just say, no, I never said that. And then there's a video that comes out and says, I did say that.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious to me that people ignore those videos and ignore those things. But then they also, the politicians don't embrace that level of integrity. And so and I guess it's probably because it's so often used against them in other ways. So it is a landmine. It's a different world, but I do believe that independent mindset and that floater is the same concept in politics. And it's interesting that they tend to sway elections as they do sway, buying. I love the Visual Capitalist, or one of those websites does sometimes, and it might not be them, but they do like this live, maybe 1992 to 2022, and they show the brands that have that have increased or decreased. So luxury brands, wines, like which country sold the most wine. I will watch that video, and it's so intriguing to me, because it's like, oh, Louis Vuitton, Gucci.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept. It's that flow of independent thinkers that are shaping that next level of growth.
Yeah, no, I know those diagrams you mean. There's something slightly beguiling about them.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So we've talked about the advertisements that we've liked in the historical perspective. What are some of the brands that you really love to watch today? Like, who's doing it right, and what are some of the things they're doing right now?
Yeah, so I think some of the brands that do things well, I mean, I would argue in their heyday, Apple were fantastic at applying behavioral science, because I think they took principles that were normally applied in quite a pedestrian, lackluster way and applied them with much greater flair. So probably the psychological principle that most people will be familiar with is an idea called social proof. Now, if you go to the supermarket, loads of the breakfast cereals or the shampoos and deodorants will say America's favorite, or we sell 10 million bottles. That's the idea of social proof. It's the idea that has been proven again and again and again, that if you make yourself appear popular, you'll become more popular still. Now, virtually every brand that applies this does it very directly. They state their number of units sold, or the million people that buy them, or their relative market share. But what Apple did was a far more subtle application of this idea. They didn't go out and when they first launched the iPod and state their popularity. They just created the impression of popularity. So, remember back to those early years of the iPod, early 2000s. You're in a cafe, you can see some people listening to MP3 players. Generally, you would have no idea what brand was being listened to. Because if they were listening to a Sony, if they were listening to a Philips, and the hardware was in their pocket, that's where the logo was, you had no idea what brand they were listening to because they all had the same interchangeable black headphones. Now think about Apple. With the iPod, could still be in someone's pocket, but they had the distinctive white earbuds, and all their advertising emphasized their white earbuds. So as soon as you saw someone listening through those type of earbuds, you knew they were listening to Apple. Now, that to me is a brilliant use of a well-known bias, but rather than applying it in this literal mindset that most marketers do, it's much more lateral, much more creative.
Yeah, I remember when it came out, and I was one of those people that had like the CD container that was this thick, and it rode with me in the car, and I would flip to a CD, and when this thing came out, and I was like, wait a second, you can have 1,000 songs in your pocket. It was game changing, and I immediately bought it. And then when they initiated the phone, I said, wait a second, you can carry your phone and have 1,000 songs on your phone. It's a no-brainer to me.
Yeah. So interestingly, you picked that ad because that, I think, is an example of a different bias being applied brilliantly. So one of the most interesting studies about memory comes from a Canadian psychologist called Ian Begg. And he did the original study back in 1972. He used a very small sample size, but I've rerun his study 2022. So this is a valid finding. But in his study, he reads out a list of words or phrases. So some of the phrases, what he called concrete phrases, like square door or white horse. These are tangible things that you can visualize. Some of the phrases are what he calls abstract ones, like subtle truth or basic fact. Gives people 20 of these phrases, gives them a chance to read through his list, takes the list away, and then asks people to recall as much as they can. And his finding was that on average, people remember 9% of the abstract phrases, 36% of the concrete phrases. So you have this massive fourfold swing in memorability, huge change in memorability. Now, his argument, Begg's argument, is that vision's the most powerful of our senses. So if we can picture a word like a square door, when I say it, it will pop into people's mind, it's very sticky. But if I use abstract phrasing like basic truth, there's nothing to visualize. So it's very, very forgettable. So now going back to that line that you mentioned, 1,000 songs in your pocket, that is a brilliant concrete phrase. You can picture a pocket, you can imagine a song. That makes it very, very memorable even 20 years later. But think back to what virtually every other brand talks about storage and memory in terms of the number of megabytes. You can't remember a picture a megabyte, so it's very, very forgettable. So yes, Apple were brilliant at creating this sense of popularity by behaving distinctively. But when it came to their copy, again and again, they're a very good example, I think, of a brand who use concrete visualizable language, which makes it memorable.
Yeah, and then they even got it down to the packaging, right? I mean, the smell of the box, the tightness of it, almost gets, you have this anticipation when you're opening it because it's taking a little while. You cannot just lift it off easily. You have to unwrap it like a present. And I mean, the level of detail and experience that they provided was something that to this day, people get excited about. The new iPhone comes out and, people wait to get it. And that would be a flaw. You mentioned that they used to. I think one of the things that would be smart for Apple, if we're using the flawed concept here, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have an ad that says, yes, we know you got to get a new iPhone every other year, but let's be honest, you love it.
The only thing I would say to that is the ideal flaw to admit is one that has a mirror strength. So as long as you can link a strength to the need to replace it.
Yeah. So is it faster? Yeah. Is it better? Does it look better? Is it smaller? Like whatever it is, like there's gotta be something to mirror it, but that's great. What's an example of someone who you think is doing it wrong? Who has the potential?
Do you know what I think one of the examples that comes up again and again in the UK is the misuse of social proof. So remember, social proof is this idea that if you emphasize a product is popular, it will become more popular still. There's a lovely experiment from Robert Cialdini at Arizona State University,
Yeah.
that warns about the danger of emphasizing how commonplace and antisocial behavior is. So in his study, he's picked the Arizona Petrified Wood National Park to do this study because loads of tourists go to the park and they are stealing bits of petrified wood as a memento. So he wants to see what happens if you emphasize the scale of theft, what happens to theft rates. So he finds a secluded bit in the park. He sprinkles bits of wood along the path. So anyone who goes down the path has the chance to steal and they think they won't be caught. But he has rigged up CCTV cameras nearby and hidden them. So he monitors a baseline theft rate. When there's no signs around, 2.9% of people steal a bit of wood. He then puts up a sign saying, basically, stealing is wrong, don't do it. And theft rates drop to 1.7%. So he shows you can change this behavior. But then what should interest us is he puts up a sign where he purposely misuses social proof. The sign says something along the lines of 12 tons of wood are being stolen each year and it's ruining the look of the park. So he's emphasizing the commonality of this behavior. And when he does that, there is an almost tripling of theft rates. You get up to 7.9% of people stealing a bit of wood. Cialdini's argument is if you emphasize antisocial behavior as a common, you remove a sense of transgression, you use social proof in the wrong way, and you encourage the very behavior you don't want. So back to your question of where does behavioral science go wrong? You see it a lot in charity, in social good campaigning, in government campaigning. So in Britain, you see messages like loads of students get drunk, or loads of youth are carrying knives, or loads of people don't go to their doctor's appointment. That messaging, according to all the experimentation, is likely to make the situation worse. So often, I would say the worst culprit is often the government in terms of what they say to people.
It's interesting because we've seen some major swings in the United States recently with Anheuser-Busch and some of the companies that are getting political, and they're politicizing in some capacity some of the campaigns, almost like governments do, where they accentuate a point and then the average Bud Light drinker did not like the concept that the marketing division was going at. We're not going to argue whether that's right or wrong. The discussion is strictly on the strategy, and the strategy lost them enormous amounts of money in market share, to the point where like you could find Bud Light and Budweiser everywhere stacked, and it's on sale in places. It's ridiculous how crazy it was responded.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of interesting things there. There's one bit which is, if you're going to make a stand, you might as well at least continue with the stand. The worst thing to do, from my reading of it, is they make from their view, an ethical stand. They get a bit of pushback, and then they swing back. Now you've alienated both audiences, so you're in the worst of all possible situations. But in terms of, I think, an underlying psychological insight that might be of broad relevance, there is an idea from, I think he was at Stanford, a psychologist called Lee Ross, and he ran this brilliant experiment back in 1977. So it's a thought experiment. He says to people, imagine you are driving down the road, it's a 30-mile-an-hour zone, and you're driving 35, you're spotted by the police, and you are given a ticket and a fine. You get back home and you realize the police person has made some errors. Let's say it's the wrong day, wrong number plate. The question he asks everyone is, would you accept the fine? You were speeding after all. Or would you contest it because you're likely to get off on an administrative error? So people say accept or contest. And then the key question he asks them is, and what do you think other people would do? And that's the real experiment. And what he finds is that if the participants had accepted the fine, they assumed most other people would accept the fine. If the participants had contested the fine, they assumed most other people would contest the fine. The argument from Lee Ross is, whatever our belief, let's say we are a vegan or we vote for, independent parties, it's not that we think everyone else does that, but we will massively overestimate the prevalence of those attitudes or behaviors. So I think one area might well be, certainly in the UK, if you're working in marketing, you've 99% of people have got a degree. That's, probably, only 50% of the population do. There's a very large, I think, left-leaning group within marketing. So there are lots, certainly in the UK, of differences between the professional and then who they're selling to. And there is a real danger that professionals assume that what motivates them is what motivates everyone. And I think that can explain why sometimes marketing campaigns go wrong. They're talking to themselves, or we're talking to ourselves.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In the US, I've always found it interesting because, we have the two-party system, and it's the left-leaning and the right-leaning. But the left-leaning, because they have the marketing, it tends to be the edgier campaigns, the ones that are that touch you. You look at Obama's campaign, and it was run from a marketing perspective to perfection. I mean, they elevated him in a way to be a hero, and the pictures were iconic, and posters, and they had grassroots, opportunities. It was some of the best marketing and advertising I'd ever seen in an election. And then you look at Trump in the US, and all the gear and the hats and the things that have created, like they have merch. I heard a comedian say, if you don't have merch nowadays as a politician, you aren't anything, and you will never win an election again. And so, it is interesting how, and I guess the correlation I'm just simply making is, it's interesting how marketing and advertising affects all parts of our lives. And if you pay attention to it, it's really interesting, and it's very unique.
Yeah, and yes, there are sometimes differences between which of these experiments and biases are useful on a personal level, and which are useful when you've got a big advertising budget. But they're not mutually exclusive. I think a lot of the tactics about, as you say, getting people to come to a wine event, or persuading someone to take a job, or going all the way down to how you deal with your family. You're still trying to persuade someone to behave differently. I think a lot of the skills in marketing advertising can be applied at those different scales.
Yeah, what's funny, going back to that wine festival, it's really interesting. You learn so much when you build something. One of the things that we did is, in the beginning, we overestimated how valuable the fact that all ticket sales and all the money we raised went to charity. We felt like it was one of the most important factors. And on average, after almost 14 years of running this event, I could tell you that the people that are at the event on average don't care. They buy tickets regardless of whether or not it's going to charity. And then when we tell them, it's like, oh, that's really nice. And in the beginning, it was like what we led with. We led all of our marketing, all of our campaigns. Everything we were doing was about making a difference, making an impact, because it was so important to us. And it was a misguided campaign that we had to change and adjust.
Yeah. So I think there's some really interesting bits in that. Firstly, there is this big broad theme in behavioral science and psychology that what people say motivates them and what actually motivates people are quite often different things. If you say to someone, would us giving the money away to a charity make you more likely to come to an event? Everyone's going to say, yeah, of course it would, of course it would, of course it would. But you might well have a very different actual effect if you did an A/B test on the ticket sales. So there's on charity particularly, there's a lovely study, and I can't remember what university he's at, but it's a psychologist called Nicholas Eckley. And the university he's at do a fundraising drive every year. And let's say the thing to do is people buy, let's say daffodils, a little badge of a daffodil. That's your way of donating money. Before the fundraising week, he goes up to people and says, will you buy a daffodil, and how much will you pay? And let's say, I'm getting the numbers slightly wrong, but people say on average, okay, I'm going to give $5, I'm going to buy 2 daffodils. Then he goes up to another group of people and says, how much do you think other people will spend on the daffodils, and how much, what percentage of people will buy? Um, and then he looks at the actual sales data of the daffodils after the event. And what he finds is both groups overestimated the volume of sales. Both of them are over optimistic. But the people who were predicting the behavior of others were much closer to reality. So I think sometimes if you're in a situation where you've got this problem of getting to the truth because there is a socially perceived acceptable answer, what you might want to think about doing is this trick of asking not what people would do, asking people what they think others would do. And it gives them license to answer a bit more critically and honestly.
Yeah, it's great. It's sort of like how you know, you have everybody has their family conversations around the dinner table, and those
Yeah.
family conversations around the dinner table may or may not be the same ones they're having outside.
Yeah.
And as you raise children, you teach your children, you say, listen, this is an authentic and honest space, and we want you to say what's most important. And they might say something, and you correct them very quickly. You're like, hey,
Yeah.
listen, okay, that might be true. That might be something that happened. That might be an interpretation you have. Don't ever say that out in public again. That's not appropriate, or that's not something good, or that would be unacceptable. And they're learning boundaries of what's acceptable and what's not out
Yeah.
in the open world. And so it is true. If I ask everybody what someone else would think is important, it does. I think that's great research, because it does give them the ability to be critical and to be closer to honest versus
Yeah.
the other way around.
And so I think you're absolutely right that that's a good tactic for getting to answers when the individual knows the truth. They're just not comfortable admitting it. But there is a broader problem with research. Psychologists have this phrase. They say people confabulate. And it's the idea, often people are trying to tell the research the truth, but they genuinely don't know why they bought the wine they did or the trainers they did. So a psychologist called Timothy Wilson at University of Virginia says we are strangers to ourselves. Now that's a real problem, because if you put someone on the spot, send them a survey, get them in a focus group, and ask them why they buy tickets to a wine festival, they'll give you loads of answers, but there'll only be a subsection of the reason that they won't know some of the subtler drivers of their behavior. So the tactic from the psychologist would not be to directly ask people, but to do more A/B testing, essentially. Now, 500 people see the message about buy the ticket, we're going to give some to charity. Another 500 see a completely different message, buy a ticket because we're the most popular wine festival in Virginia. And, that is a more accurate way of understanding what motivates people. I think it's the prioritization of observed data over claimed data.
Yeah, that's good and helpful. We started selling out tickets a couple years ago,
Yeah.
and it makes a big difference when we started selling out. And we might be within 100 tickets of what we sold the year before, but when we started launching the sellout and we maxed the ticket sales at a certain amount, the impact that had on selling out every other year was so substantial. Another thing that we learned that was very valuable, that has made such a major impact. We get money in quicker. We get tickets sold quicker. We had the ability to leverage pricing. It's all relative based on, and I would say that we use behavioral science for all of it. I mean, we genuinely have implemented so many of the things that you talk about, and it's nice to listen to the research that supports the reasons why.
Well, you know what, we talked a bit earlier about the pratfall effect. And if you remember the dates I mentioned, Elliot Aronson ran the academic experiment in 1966. But the first advertising example I mentioned was 1959. VW launched the Beetle, ugly as any skin deep. So this ordering of entrepreneurs and advertisers and brands coming up with an idea first and academics following often happens. The creative who was involved in the VW or Avis campaigns, Bill Bernbach, famously said, a small admission gains a large acceptance. So often entrepreneurs and marketers have got to some of these ideas, I think, before academics. So absolutely. Yeah, I think it's brilliant that you're seeing these work in practice.
Well, it's fun to listen to the research, and it's fun to listen to the supporting evidence. of things that when you're actually doing things and acting and you're course correcting and pivoting, if you have success, it's because you learned from the things you made mistakes on and the vulnerabilities that you had. And so when you're supporting it with the research and you're showing all the years of success of how these things have been done, it's just so it's uplifting to anybody listening.
Yeah, hopefully. And also the danger is if you look back at what's worked and what's not worked, often people are in situations where multiple variables changed at once. So looking at your own experience, it's sometimes hard to know what the driver of one year's success was for a particular festival. But if you know about all these different levers, you can look back what worked well, what didn't, and then sometimes spot when those behavioral biases are being used and when they weren't. And I think it makes it easier to see the genuine drivers of success, the things that we need to repeat next year and the year after and the year after.
So I know that we geek out about these types of things because I know what you love to research, and I love what I love what you're talking about. One of the other things that we noticed was the demographic that we served was predominantly female. So it was close to 90. Our Facebook following of 14,000 people was 89% women. Our demographic at the event was majority women. What we didn't anticipate is we do this event in October, and we had a couple of years in a row where we had a nor'easter come through, we had a hurricane, a state of emergency, and but it was Hurricane Sandy was probably the most interesting because it came up and swiped Virginia. We opened the gates at 12 o'clock. The governor declared a state of emergency, but we were getting downpours of rain, but we weren't getting lightning. We weren't getting severe wind. It went up and eventually hit New Jersey, New York. We had over 5,500 people show up and still drink wine in a hurricane. And this was my research brain. Here's what happens. The average male that's married, that has children, can make a decision to leave his home most days without any major effect, meaning that you call me and we're going to go golfing. And this is changing as the years go on, by the way, but you call me, we're going to go golfing. And I say, hey, Adrian, my wife, I'm going to go golfing with Richard today, this morning. And she goes, okay, well, when are you going to be home? And I say, I'll be home at 4 o'clock and let's do dinner tonight and we'll go out. And, I make it fun, right? Instead, what women have to do, what my wife does, is she puts it on the calendar a month in advance. She reminds me 27 times that she has the wine festival with the girls coming up next weekend and on Saturday. And they get to the day and there's a hurricane. And all the moms look at each other and say, we are not staying home. We are going out and we are going to turn a table over, sit with our backs against the table and drink wine in the rain. And that literally happened. And so from a research perspective, when you know the demographic, these were my takeaways. When I understood the demographic and I started to market more distinctly to that demographic and understand that, to call those things out. We had rain 4 or 5 years out of 9. It was kind of painful. So we started putting all the rain pictures up and showing rain boots and saying, have you got your rain boots yet for the Chesapeake, Virginia Wine Festival? All the things that you've talked about are the very things that we've done over the years that have helped us to succeed in a time where we had a lot of negative impact that we turned into positive, but it was fun understanding it. And I love the one about the women because they showed up no matter what. And I love that. I love the demographic. I love how awesome they are. And I love how cool it was to look at it.
Yes. Oh, fantastic. The only one that strikes me there is, because I completely agree with you around that, the importance of identifying target audience and understanding their specific motivations. There is an interesting theme in behavioral science called the fundamental attribution error. And it's the argument that, yes, target audience are important, but also think about target contexts. So the point being, I might be mean or arrogant. That might be my description as a target audience. But in reality, how mean or arrogant I am, or generous or confident, if we're going to be positive, will vary over the different situations and contexts of him. And psychologists argue that there is more variation within people than is popularly believed. So you might want to think about, well, not just what audience is most likely to come to the event, but also what moments are they most likely to want to buy a ticket. So, for example, there's some lovely studies that show people are less price sensitive when they're in a good mood. So the target could be, yes, women of a certain age, or what you mentioned the audience was, but also people who are in a happy mood. So I love this idea from behavioral science of, yes, there's target audiences, but also think about what's the ideal target context to reach.
Yeah, that's great. We run a campaign where for 1 month straight, we run in July, so that we sell as many tickets as we can for the October event. We run an event where it's $5 off a ticket or $10 off a ticket. And watching the wave, number one, Mondays versus Fridays have a distinctive difference in buying. Believe it or not, they see it Friday, but when we resend it Monday is when they actually buy. They don't often buy on Friday, even though they tend to be in a better mood. They buy on Monday because they forgot it Friday. And then we notice at the end, the 26th, the 27th, the 28th, the 28th and 29th and 30th, we see all the ticket sales come in. It's like, oh my gosh, we have to get it now. And so we see thousands of tickets sold in that short amount of time. And then the other interesting part is we obviously were predominantly female audience. Well, that doesn't last long. Like a good club that is a predominantly female club, it becomes very male influenced after a while because the demographic is noticed and people recognize it. And so the demographic shifts and it changes and it ages out and ages in. It's so interesting to watch. And I've loved learning about it. And I've loved listening to all the things that you stand for. What are some of the things that our listeners should know about you so they can find you, they could potentially hire you, they can learn your research? Like, what are the things that our listeners can do?
Well, there's a couple of things. So I've written 2 books. You mentioned again, Choice Factory, and the latest one, The Illusion of Choice. So that's probably a good starting place. And if people like that style of thinking and that approach, then the best thing to probably do is reach me on LinkedIn, or my Twitter handle is @rshotton. So send me a DM, and always nice to meet someone who's interested in behavioral science or wants a behavioral science consultancy.
Yeah, you know what? We can try lots of things, but we add research to what's known. And when you start talking about Robert Cialdini and people like this, these are the godfathers of influence, of sales, of marketing, of understanding human behavior, which is even more important because all the sales and marketing means nothing if we don't understand who we're talking to.
Absolutely. And I'd echo that. I think if people want a book recommendation, Cialdini's 1980s classic Influence is one of the best places to start. Yeah.
That is awesome. Richard, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm
Likewise.
so grateful to learn from you. I look forward to learning more from you and picking up the books and understanding more about the research. And I appreciate the time you've shared with our listeners today.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Scott.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.